Hello and welcome to another interview with author Carl Vonderau. Carl is the BookBase Gold author for the month of November, having his novel Murderabilia be the focal point of today's conversation. Giving context before we start, Carl is a crime thriller suspense author that specializes in using his experience as a banker and storyteller to write compelling novels. Again, if you enjoy this type of content, please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, as well as follow our Instagram and TikTok. Carl, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. It's great to be with you, Nathan.
Of course.
And I want to add one other thing, that
Yeah.
all my novels are based on family dysfunction and how families have to come together in order to survive.
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
Thank you so much for bringing that up
Yeah.
because it is one of our questions.
Oh, great.
Yeah, of course, because I know you
Yeah.
mentioned that before in our
Yeah.
earlier conversations.
Yeah.
Before we get to that, though, I do want to just ask one question about the name of the book. I think a great question to start off would be, to ask you for your definition of Murderabilia and how that inspired your debut novel.
Yeah, well, I didn't actually, there is something called Murderabilia. And if you really want to get creeped out, Google it.
Right.
Because it's basically artwork from cons as well as serial killers and killers. So, for instance, Charlie Manson did all kinds of artwork. Jeffrey Dahmer did poetry. Gacy did all kinds of paintings, and these are all sold over the dark web for incredible amounts of money. So, but when I started this, I just wanted something that his father would do, that my protagonist's father would do, that would set him off. And he took very artistic pictures of his victims, all well lit and everything. And he, as I posit in the book, he started Murderabilia, where people were collecting his photos. I didn't know it until I started looking up, Harvey Glatt and these others who took photographs of their victims, that these were actually sold. And then I discovered the term Murderabilia. Originally, the title of the book was In the Dark Room, or The Dark Room, actually. But my publisher liked Murderabilia so much that they insisted that it be the title. I think they were probably right.
Yeah, no, I think it's for the word Murderabilia, not only does it serve a great insight to the novel for those who are just looking at the cover. But I think the concept itself is just so creepy, like you mentioned. And the book definitely carries an ominous vibe where you can't help but just feel a little bit of unease when you're just learning about the protagonist's father and the situation that's happening in this novel. So I think that one word captures the complete aesthetic of what this novel tries to put up.
Well, thanks, Nathan.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we're talking about just to give context as well for me reading this novel. So I was traveling at the time and I got a copy and I was reading at the same time I was watching this Netflix show called Monster, and it's like a special series that analyzes serial killers in a dramatized way. The Ed Gein one was just out when I started reading it.
Guy.
Oh, absolutely. It's so funny because I'm watching the show and in that show it also talks about Murderabilia, where he would write letters to fans and fans would send him stuff, and there was this weird, awkward kind of conversation that he would have within the psych ward that he was a part of. And watching his other documentaries and true crime and stuff, it's so prominent. Like, it shows up everywhere. As soon as they get arrested, there's always that one person that's like, hey, I'm a big fan, or like, hey, I think you're so cool.
Well, why are we attracted to these shows to begin with?
Right.
And why do we have heroes as serial killers? Right. And the psychologists have looked at it, and there are various explanations. Some people say it gives you a kind of adrenaline rush, like a video game. I think some people want to get close to this evil without being a part of it. Some people want to feel that, that could be me, that's inside me, but it's not. And some people just like the notoriety of it. I'll tell you, if I bought any of it, my wife would divorce me.
I think my wife would divorce me too. If I was married, I'm like, hey, so you looked into the floorboards.
Really?
I think that'd be such an awkward conversation, to say the least.
Honey, I want to take a picture of you. Oh, no, you're not.
No, absolutely. And, I think to touch on that point again, I think one thing that people have always said about the unknown is that people always fear what they don't understand. And with that fear comes a little bit of a mystical curiosity. And I think that relationship is very much shown in this novel between the protagonist and his father.
Yeah, well, and if you look at tribal cultures, you know, the totems that they would take parts of the people that they defeated in battle.
Right.
They would eat parts of it, like the heart of someone,
Right.
in order to absorb that kind of power.
Absolutely.
It's also a totem against the evil forces. You know, if you have it close to it, it'll fight off the other evil forces.
Right.
There are all kinds of strange explanations.
Right, and it's so, you know, in tune with like a lot of old cultures, and you know, we can even see the echoes of it in many cultures that we have today. We were just talking about Day of the Dead, and there's always been a focus on, you know, the afterlife, people that pass on, and just trying to understand that mystical element of like, you know, what is really death and how does it really affect people around that.
Well, if you look at the Inca culture,
Right.
you know, the Incas, the dead people still owned property, so they had to consult the dead people before they did anything with it.
That must be horrible real estate advice. Imagine, hey, I'm trying to buy this from the owner, but he kind of passed away a couple years ago. I don't know if the price went down or what's going on with that.
You never get beyond dad.
Right. And, you know, I know you talked about this right when the interview started, but I wanted to ask, you know, when you talk about the characters in this novel, what made you want to base the protagonist as the child of a serial killer rather than someone who was maybe more of a direct victim of the parents' crimes?
Well, I was very curious as to, you know, obviously the person they kill, that a serial killer puts to death, they suffer and their families suffer. But I wonder, what does it do to the child of a serial killer? You know, and do they suffer too? Are they victims in their own way?
Right.
And they really are.
Yeah.
I mean, I read a fair number about them. You know, the daughter of BTK, the serial killer in Kansas, she didn't know anything about it until an FBI agent showed up at her door. And then it was as if her whole life was a lie.
Yeah.
And they think, how could I have loved someone that did this to other people? So those kinds of conflicts and guilt I thought were really interesting.
Yeah.
And if you look at the actual people, most of them have very difficult lives.
Right.
Like Charlie Manson had 3 sons by 3 different mothers. And one of them committed suicide. Another was bullied throughout school. And the third one changed his name, and nobody knows where he is or who he is, which is like William does in my novel, or his family does.
No, absolutely, and I think that's a normal response. I think if you are a product of someone that's committed those heinous crimes, I would also change my name, to say the least, because I feel like that name itself just carries that curse with
it's
you.
It's a stigma, you know, and people won't forgive you for what your father did.
Right, and I think this novel does a great job at showing the hardships and the inner conflict of loving someone as a child for who they are or how they presented themselves to you, and then you learn about such a dark secret, and the rest of your life is trying to balance that hatred that you can't help but have towards someone that could you know, do these horrible, crazy acts, and then at the same time you can't help but just think about the memories of a loving person that was there for you.
Yes,
you know, how do you balance that?
How do you balance it? How do you justify that?
Right.
And you know, and these people aren't all evil.
Right.
In this book, and as in the others too, Harvey never physically abused his kid. Well, he psychologically abused his kid and his wife and his family.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's another interesting fact, is that, you know, you, like in this book, you see the serial killer trying to talk to his son, and you sense this ominous, threatening presence that's happening between these interactions.
Yeah.
But then you see through the book that the serial killer is trying to redeem his son, or he's trying to help him in a way that he doesn't even understand. And I think that just adds to the quote-unquote craziness that comes with this whole concept that you have in this plot, is that you have someone that comes off as loving initially, but then they turn a crooked corner, and the whole book is trying to understand exactly where that's coming from. And it's so funny how it's like, you see William, he has his understanding, he talks to his dad, and all that's shattered, because then you talk to the person that's done it, and the conversations that they have, it's constant tangents. You don't know where this is going, and it's just such a frustrating, yet I'm sure there's a little bit of grieving in there, because it's like, dang, I'm trying to get my dad back. I'm trying to get that man that I once cared about back into my life, but every time I talk to him, you just keep on hitting that hard wall. Yeah. And I think that, you know, that theme of family connections and trying to understand what family really means it's very much present in this novel. You do a great job at trying to question that and trying to really question about how we connect to people.
Well, he has the family. He has the suspicion or the wonder, do I carry that gene?
Right.
Will I turn into something like that?
Yeah.
Is that hidden inside me? So he wants to both understand his father and make sure he never is like him.
Right.
So that's why he would save pictures and artifacts of what his father did.
Right.
Because it was like his own talisman to make sure that it would never happen to him.
Absolutely.
And then in the book there are points where you kind of wonder, is he turning into this?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And you could even see the same relationship with Polly, the sibling, because she decides to pretty much erase everything about it, right?
Yes.
Where William is trying to have that memory of like, hey, is this something that I'm going towards? Polly decides to take her own path. And in the book, we get into the details of how she exactly does take that path. But we also touch upon another factor of this whole relationship. And I know you brought this up when we again met earlier, but you know, this book also has a conversation about using religion as a way to deal with trauma that people face in life.
Yeah.
You know, with you being a Christian Scientist, I know the book talks about, you know, William's family also being Christian Scientists as well. And the mom taking a little bit of a radical approach to trying to like scrub out the stain that the family has. And I wanted to ask, you know, what do you think about the ideology of believing that you can make evil disappear? Because I know that this is based off of your past.
Yeah. Well, you know, there are shades of being a Christian Scientist. I mean, some people are really out there and they're fundamentalist about it, and some people are much more realistic about it, and they take their kids to doctors and they do this. But fundamentally, the religion is, at least to me, was saying that evil only has power if you give it power.
Right.
So if you don't give it power, it will cease to exist. The same with physical hurting, you know? Yeah. And this was the way I was brought up. I'm not a Christian Scientist anymore. But it can be a way, it can be very self-affirming, that you can control everything about your life and what you feel about life. And it can also be very manipulative in that a mother who says illness is not real says, you know better than that. Don't give that illness power, and they'll never accept it. And then a mother who says, well, all the evil about my husband that's not going to be in my children. That has no place in the universe. Right. It doesn't allow the children to grieve, but at the same time, it tells the children, you're not like him.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
It's double-edged. You know?
Yeah. And I think other religions also do that in a similar fashion. Like, for example, you know, I recently went to Mexico, and you see these beautiful churches, and you go inside and you see these booths on the side, and they're confessional booths. Yeah. And it's like, what do they serve? And it's like, it's a similar way where it's a way of using religion to gain control over your life when facing a act of evil or feeling like you may have committed an act of, you know, sin. Yeah. And, you know, going to these booths and you see these one-on-ones where nobody knows what's happening in this booth. It's between a priest and somebody that's just talking. And the hope is that you come out of it feeling like you have control again over your life. And there's other religions also have another facet of that as well. And I think the relationship between witnessing evil, committing evil, and also confessing evil when you're in a religious background, I think it's something that everybody, I think, has a unique relationship with, because everybody sees it differently.
That's interesting. Right? You would break it down that way.
Yeah. It's definitely something that you see, I think, in older churches, because when I go to these new churches, or like when I even go to my temple and stuff, it's you don't really see that. You know, it's a different, I think. Another thing was we visited a church in Mexico, and they still do, I forgot what it's called, where they whip themselves. I forgot what it's called.
Self-flagellation.
Self-flagellation, yes. And it was another way of me understanding that by, you know, conflicting self-pain, you gain control over yourself, because it's like a way of, you know, kind of moving on from it.
And you're at one with Jesus in some way. You feel the same pain.
Right, right. And I think that's another complicated theme that I would say is very hard to, you know, communicate in a novel. But not only do you talk about the family dynamic, but you're also talking about this religious dynamic as well. And that's why I really loved this novel, because it's not just about, hey, there's something happening, let me find out. It's a constant self-analysis of, how are these acts affecting me? How are these acts affecting my family? Am I becoming like this act that I'm trying to solve? Am I becoming like these people that I don't want to follow? Right. And I think, you know, that's something you can't help but just ask yourself, Because I've also seen true crime documentaries where police officers take that trauma to bed with them, right? Like it's not just someone that's committing the crime. You're also talking to people that are trying to work every day to solve it. And there are police officers that admit that, you know, they go to bed and they're not the same person because they see these things, and you can't help but wonder, you know, how could a human only commit these acts? But am I kind of touching that line from just witnessing all of this, you know, all this violence?
And the son looks at the pictures. He says, I'm not like that, I'm not like that, but he's absorbing those pictures at the same time.
Absolutely.
This isn't my father that I knew, but this is my father that I knew. You're right. So that contradiction is constantly going back and forth inside him. And Polly has the same problem because she's gay, and her mother won't accept that because that's not the image and likeness of God according to her Christian Science. So, you know, her mother is, I mean, like many gay people, her mother has never accepted that aspect of her.
Right.
So that's why she's very separate from her mother.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, that relationship is something that's continuously explored in the novel as well, because it's trying to balance your own personal life, your family's life, but then you're also trying to kind of at moments close the curtain on this ugly secret that the family has, and then you open it and you see how that, you know, that act affects the relationships that you have with your family as well as amongst self-identity, which is why Polly, I think, is a very interesting character.
I thought she was too,
Absolutely.
I talked to a number of, I'm straight, and so I had to get some insight into the gay community, and I talked to a number of people in the gay community to try and get that right.
No, I think it's important to do that research, especially with a book like this. I think when you really are trying to communicate emotions of people that have been victims of crimes like this in a similar fashion to the crimes that we've seen in the past and just history, I think, you know, the way that you were able to look at pictures for Harvey, or you were able to look at accounts of children of serial killers, talk to people in the LGBTQ community to understand how Polly should go about her identity in the novel. You know, I think you do the proper research, and it shows. It does a great job in showing.
Well, thank you. I'm not really a photographer, so I had to educate myself a good deal on photography and the history of photography. And Harvey was a real student of photography. So I've based some of the photos he did of his victims on famous photos. And some of them are key to solving the crime.
Right. And I know, you know, speaking of Harvey, in this novel, there's multiple people that commit bad deeds for the sake of being good for society. For example, we have Detective Lund and Detective Blake that lie to William, having this lawyer say, you know, quote unquote, they're allowed to lie to you, but you can't lie to them. And I thought that was a great quote because it, you know, there are examples in history where we've seen, you know, stuff like the police force, you know, images of good and, you know, symbolic good in society commit acts of manipulation to gain the ability to solve the crime. And we also have Harvey, you know, the father serial killer. They quickly learn that he only, you know, kills people that abuse children. So in a sense, he's kind of, you know, helping, he thinks he's helping children by killing, you know, parents that have taken advantage of them and abused them. And I wanted to ask, like, did you mean to showcase this irony towards those that commit bad acts for the sake of promoting good? Or what was that like?
Yes, and not all of them are good.
Like
the one who's in charge of the bank, she's as close to totally bad as you can
Vanessa,
get.
Right?
Vanessa. And but Harvey, he is motivated. I mean, every villain is a hero in his own story, right? So he's motivated by his own abused past. Because if you look at the research, serial killers, there's a genetic aspect and there's also an environmental aspect. And his environmental aspect was really big. So he thinks, you know, he's preventing this from happening to other children, but it's warped in his own way.
I also noticed that in the novel, there's a specific aesthetic that you give to the police force in this book as well, where the only detectives that you tend to see are the ones that are, it's like a double-edged sword that you mentioned earlier, where you have these detectives that are dedicated to solving the crime, but they're also willing to use you as a suspect to see if you're also part of this crime as well. And there's this pull and push where you see these detectives trying to help William and be like, hey, like, we're here to solve this crime, we're gonna help you. And then right when William leaves the police department, they handcuff him and they say, wait a minute, that doesn't mean that you're not a part of the story as well.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask, like, what was your inspiration for creating these detectives?
Yeah, I've talked to defense lawyers, and this is a pretty common technique among detectives. The minute that they point to you as a suspect, then they're supposed to give you your rights. But they often will give you a version of your rights that's not exactly the way that you're used to hearing it.
Wow.
You have the right to remain silent, anything you say may be used against you, that's the typical one.
Right.
But they may say the same thing in another way, so you don't realize they're giving you your rights.
Right. Right. So, on top of that, also the scene with giving a Coke a can.
Yes.
He drinks it. That's how they get their DNA. Or
the fingerprint.
The fingerprints.
Yeah.
Or when they say something like, "Oh, we're just asking because we're just using this to understand the timeline." Little do you know, like they're trying to see where your events are, to see if it lines up with the events.
Exactly, and they're trying to see whether you can incriminate yourself without warning you that you can have a lawyer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's such an interesting aspect, I think, of just, in general, of just trying to solve for the sake of good, is that there's this constant question of where do you draw the line between, trying to do good for the acts of evil to solve the crime, but also the minute crimes that you may be committing on the route to trying to solve that. It's such a unique irony that people, I think,
it's everywhere, including when it goes to Algeria. These people commit massacres for the good of their religious doctrine, so they'll be better in the face of God. Detectives are trying to find the killer, this terrible killer, and all right, they pull a few tricks, but as long as they find the killer, isn't that okay?
Yeah.
You know?
That's a great question that the book brings up. And I remember putting the book down after learning about Detective Lund and Blake and see how they did the things that they did. It kind of, when it came to the ending of the book, part of me was like, are you sure you're going to wrap this up the right way? Because I feel like once you lose credibility of a detective doing stuff that you think are sketchy, it's hard to keep that faith when they say something like, hey, William, don't worry, we're going to try to see what we can do to solve this case. You're like, oh, like, are you sure? Like, maybe it should be somebody else. And, that's a great,
and William does the same thing.
Right, absolutely, absolutely. And, I know you brought up William. Another thing that I thought was so interesting that I wanted to bring up is, the protagonist and his father. They prove to be an interesting duo because they essentially do the same thing, but for different reasons. Harvey was a serial killer that took photos of his victims to showcase their true self, using props to share the story behind the abuse the person committed. And William was a war journalist that took photos of victims to showcase their story, using placement and camera techniques to share the story behind the abuse committed to them. And, the great line that I think Harvey says that's amazing, he says, we're both looking through the same viewfinder. Yeah. And it really creates this ominous, energy again, where he says that and you start thinking, wait a minute, it's true. People do use, cameras for the same purpose, which is to capture a moment. Yeah. But it may be for different reasons. And we see this juxtaposition take place between William and his father.
I had to smile at that line because I'd forgotten it. I'd totally forgotten it.
It was a great line. And imagine, talking to your serial killer father and you're a photographer. Yeah. He knows that. Yeah. You're trying to differentiate by saying, no, I'm not like you. And he goes, Tex.
Yes, you are.
You're using the same camera.
Yeah.
And it's crazy because, I wanted to ask, what was your purpose in crafting the protagonist to have this similar interest, even though he despises his father?
Well, he doesn't. He loves and despises his father.
Right.
It's a way for him to understand his father, and so that he will never be like his father. And it's a way for him to say, okay, you used a camera to do these terrible crimes. I'm going to use a camera in a different way to prove I'm separate from you.
Right.
I think
it's interesting because I would assume that if you really wanted to stay away from something, you would never partake in it. And William's decision is interesting to me because he chooses to follow that route, but he intentionally decides to follow that gray line to prove that he's not going to trespass on the other side.
Well, that's what he does intellectually, but I mean, subconsciously, he, it's just there and it's part of him, and he can't get away from it.
Right.
Yeah.
Especially when you look at, the family that William's a part of.
Yes. And it was a way to reject his mother too, because she didn't want him to do anything like that.
Right, and that's what I was going to say, is that in this family dynamic, you see 3 different paths essentially be taken, where the wife and the mother of William, she uses religion. She believes that religion can wipe away the sins of anybody that chooses to believe in it, and that's her path. There's Polly that chooses to reject all of it, where Polly goes, you know, my identity has nothing to do with this, I'm going to be better.
I don't even have the same sexual orientation as you do.
Right, absolutely. And you know, it really shows the rebellious nature of Polly, because everything that she does is intentional, where, you know, I do what I do, I'm strong in it, but also I'm strong in the fact that I choose to rebuke you. Like, I'm not going to go down that path.
Polly, in many ways, is the strongest character in the book. And I love Polly probably more than any other character.
No, I love Polly too. And you know, and that's why her communication with William, someone that I think is the most lenient in the sense where he's willing to walk that path of darkness, but he chooses to pull himself out at some point. You know, I could see how that's so troubling, because Polly sometimes talks to William saying, hey, are you sure you're doing this right? Like,
she
for
wants
example,
to protect him.
Right, and I could see why, because when William does the things that happen in this book, you're kind of like, are you sure you're doing this right? You know, you're the most, you know, sensitive when it comes to your father's acts. You're trying to talk to your father. You know, you're also a family man. You have 2 children, you have a wife that's all affected and wrapped up in this now. And you can see how he's trying to balance his responsibility as a son in this family that wants to solve the curse that's in his family from Harvey. And then he's also trying to be responsible for his new family to make sure it doesn't spread to them.
Yes, absolutely.
And that is so, I don't know, like, I don't want to nerd out too much about it, but it's such a deep struggle. Because I think, in a sense, that is what every new husband, every new father tends to try to do. Where everyone in this world is brought up with a specific amount of trauma. You know, you can't live this world without any baggage. But I guess the question is, how do I take my past, where I was a part of one family initially, how do I take everything that I've learned from that and make sure that when I start my own family, those curses also, or those, you know, those forms of whatever you thought was wrong, doesn't seep into this new life?
Well, and it's like what serial killer families do, some of them.
Right, to an
so
extreme
his
version,
mother
right?
was the first. She totally separated them from that, gave them a new name, took them to a new state. Nobody knows who they are. William has told no one about his father except his wife. And then he has to debate when he tells his children. And he wants them to be of an age when they can handle it, right? And so he tries to protect them that way, and by someone pointing out that this is his father and you may have committed the same crime. It just, all the protection of his children is gone. You know. Also, he sees a newspaper heading that says, "Is there a serial killer gene?" That's in there too. You know, there are some genetic aspects, but they're not very large. But it's what everybody fears.
And that's why I really love the serial killer that's very prominent in this novel, because at this point in the beginning of this novel, you know, Harvey's in jail, and then William gets a letter saying, hey, I'm your long lost brother. You know, our dad can't commit these acts. Let me go ahead and follow his footsteps. And that furthers that article that William reads, where it's like, is there a serial killer gene? Because you're trying to find out, who is this person? Because William doesn't think he has a sibling that's this lost, or like they never heard about it. And then these articles come out. He's also trying to understand his family, and then you have this random person that's killing people in a circle and goes, hey, remember, we're brothers. Hey, remember, I'm a part of you. You can't really erase that.
Exactly. You may not want to be my brother, but I'm going to make you be my brother.
And that's what's so scary about this character. And I wanted to ask, where was your headspace when you were creating the second serial killer? Because there's one like Harvey, where you're trying to base this off of the serial killers that you're reading about, you're researching about. And then you have this quote unquote new generation serial killer that's trying to, you know, follow his father's footsteps. He's trying to also take advantage of the situation and also try to show that, you know, like, if he can't do it and William doesn't want to, I'll go ahead and do it for the family. You know, how did you create that conflict with this character?
Well, I could have had Harvey still on the loose, but I liked it better to have him in prison. I don't know. It was different. You know?
No, it was different.
And then if he's in prison, then how do you connect William to his father? Well, the best way is through another serial killer. You know, so what if there is another serial killer?
Yeah.
And what would make that serial killer so connected to his father?
Right.
And what would make that serial killer think of himself as the brother to William?
Right. No, I can imagine how rough it was writing this novel because you're touching a lot of dark themes that I think it creates an interesting conversation. You know, you put the book down after you finish it and you start thinking about society in general, I feel like. You start thinking about the acts of evil that we've seen as a society and have had to move past. Yeah. We've seen, you know, minute acts of like, you know, evil happening where sometimes you see how people treat each other and you're like, wait, this isn't right. And this novel takes it to an extreme where, you know, it really makes you question relationships. It makes you question the value of whether or not your moral compass is really on right, because this book questions all of that. You know, you don't know who's really a true good character.
Well, there is one.
There is.
His wife.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was also going to talk about that as well, where, you know, I love how you use her as such a great pillar of strength throughout all of this. You know, every time William is like about to go through an insane act of like questioning and confusion, he's, you know, he doesn't know where to go. It's his family that, you know, and this is another irony. I just thought about this right now. Yeah. You know, it's ironic because it's his family that put him in this situation in the first place where he doesn't know who he is. Yeah. And then it's also his family that also saves him, gives him that identity.
But he chose Jill because she could save him.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think their background with working in Colombia, you know, the whole backstory, I think is beautiful because
thank you.
It's through these moments of witnessing, you know, again, like acts of evil, acts of negligence that sometimes we give upon other people, that you make that connection saying, hey, you understand what I'm trying to go for. Yeah. You know, let's try to go for something special. And I loved that relationship. It was so pure.
Good. Well, I've been to Colombia many times. My first time was when I was 18, and I know people that worked with street orphans. Right. And I know what that was like and what horrible things were done to street orphans and how committed these people would be. So it was nice to put that aspect in.
When you were writing about this aspect, did you try to contact them, or did you how did you go about researching this?
No, I didn't. Not for this book. Yeah, and it doesn't play as big enough part in this book to really get into it that much.
Right. But there is certainly a base where when I was reading it, I was like, wow, this sounds like someone that did do their research, and that's why it makes sense when you were telling me right now.
Yeah, and some of those stories about how they would kill children, those are all true. That's what they did, and there were, you know, and I don't know, last time I talked about this, it was like in '95, but they were killing like thousands of street orphans a year in Bogota.
Wow.
Well, no, they were killing a bunch of them. There were 5,000 street orphans, I should correct myself.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's just something that, you know, again, it's such a dark concept, but I think the thing about this book is that I think there's also a little bit of hope that comes from it, that hope of change. Yeah. And I think that's like the biggest thing that I think I took from this, is that you read this novel, you definitely dive into some really deep concepts and deep thoughts, but I think you also come out of this with this hope that, wait a minute, even though you're witnessing a lot of, you know, pain and a lot of suffering, that doesn't mean that it builds into who you inherently are. You can still be above that, and you can also push past that to try to be something better.
Well, I think you have to forgive yourself and those around you.
Right.
And that's how you rise above it.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I also wanted to ask, you know, we're approaching our final question, but I know your second book, Saving Miles, came out in 2023. And you're also currently writing your third novel right now.
It's actually my fourth.
Your fourth?
Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome. Congratulations.
Yeah, my third we've been trying to sell, but we haven't sold it yet. So.
Oh, well, we definitely have to touch that at some point for sure. But I also, you know, I wanted to ask, this is your first debut novel. I'm sure you did all this research. You did all this, you know.
I wrote this 23 times.
23 times? Yeah. What was that like? You know,
long.
Wow, that's insane. Wow. How did you know the 23rd version?
I didn't. It got worse in some of the later versions. You know, and I had, you know, maybe you've heard of Jacqueline Michard. Okay, so she wrote The Deep End of the Ocean, and it was the first pick for Oprah. And so she, some people had stolen all her money, and she was serving as a consultant. So I worked with her, and she helped me on this book.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
that's what a great blessing of her just being willing to just talk to you.
She thought of the concept of praying hands.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's really cool. And I was also going to say that, you just said that as you keep on doing your revisions, it tends to get a little bit worse. And I've heard people say that if you keep on chasing perfection, you end up leading towards imperfection. Right, you never find it, and it ends up taking you away from, the original vision that you had.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that it didn't take more than
23.
23.
Well, I had an initial agent, and we worked for a year, and he never submitted the book anywhere, and then he dropped me, and then I went back and sort of went back to some more original stuff, and I got some things solved at a conference.
Yeah.
And then I found a new agent, and then we sold the book.
That's just such a long, strenuous, but I'm sure rewarding journey, because once the book comes out, after all of this work that you put in, I'm sure it's a huge pat on the back, because it's like, not only, it doesn't even matter. I mean, of course, you would care if the book succeeds or not, but just for you as personal development, just to think about how you went through this journey, you stuck through with it, and you come out with a finished product. That's so rewarding. And I wanted to ask, what were also some things that you learned from writing this book that you've applied to your other novels? Because I'm sure this is such a great learning, experience.
Yeah, it was. I learned how to do backstory in this book, which is very important. I learned a bit about voice in this book, because this is all in first person. The next book is all in third person.
Right.
And pacing, learned about this book. A lot of things, things that you don't even know. How to structure a scene, how to make them work. How to put scenes together so that they make sense in a book.
Right.
I mean, Saving Miles is very different, because it's about a family with a teenage son who's gone off the rails. They send him to a residential treatment center. When he comes back, he seems to be totally fine, and then he sneaks off to Mexico and gets kidnapped.
Wow.
And so the family has to become involved in money laundering in order to save him a second time.
Wow.
And then there, it's in third person. And you got 3 points of view: the father, the mother, and the son.
You took it to a whole new level then with that.
Well, it was a real challenge. Yeah.
That's crazy. And if you don't mind me asking, what's the third novel about?
The third novel is again set in a bank about a man who has mourned the loss of his wife to COVID, and is kind of in a shell. And he is very attracted to a woman in the bank who he works with, and then she dies from a drug overdose. But she never used drugs. So he has to investigate what happened to her, and really the only way he's able to solve the mystery is to fall in love again.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That is such a, what's the name of that novel?
It's called Past Due.
A Past Due.
Yeah, but it hasn't been picked up by anyone yet. And the one I'm working on now is set in 1969 in Cleveland. So and has nothing to do with banking.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I remember we talked about this earlier in our last interview, where a lot of these stories, they tend to involve banking in some way because of your experience being a banker.
Yeah.
So what made you want to take that leap with the fourth novel?
To do something different.
Nice.
Challenge myself in a different way.
That's good.
It's both historically, because I have to do historical research, and then to get outside of banking and see if I can do something there.
Yeah.
But again, it relates to family. And in that one, you have, the one I'm working on now, it's a son who's an anti-war hero because his father suffers from PTSD from World War II. And then there's but anyway, I won't say any more about that one. That's
No, absolutely. I mean, I think such a great thing that you keep on bringing up is that you always choose to challenge yourself with your books, right?
Yeah, I try
I mean,
to.
starting with this first one, talking about the journey on creating this novel, to doing different perspectives with the second novel, to, doing the third novel, having it be more about romance. That's something that I feel like is a little bit different from the other two. And then the fourth one, having it not even be about banking. You always continuously try to improve and try to challenge yourself.
Trying to, yeah.
And I think that's such a great takeaway point, especially for you as an author. Like, I love hearing that. That's
well,
awesome.
it is. It's a challenge. I mean, I could have tried to do a series, but I decided to do standalones. And in many ways, it's more difficult to get them published.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's cool. Thank you so much for being here for this interview.
This has been a great conversation, Nathan.
Thanks, Carl.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I really
you really
appreciate
read
that.
the book carefully. I really, I really compliment you for that.
Oh, that means a lot to me, Carl.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I spent these last couple of weeks reading it.
Did you really?
Yeah,
wow,
and
wow.
I was at work.
You probably know it better than I do.
No. I mean, if anything, my students, I work at a middle school.
Yeah.
And students will always walk by, and it was the old cover, so it's the bloody version.
Yeah.
And they'd students would be like, "What is like? Are you reading something bad?" And I'm like, "No." I was like, "This. I met the author. Look, it's autographed." And talking to my coworkers about the novel, it's such a great experience to be able to talk to other people about stuff that other people are chasing, which is passion. Wanting to create something for themselves. And talking to my coworkers, even the BookBase team, just telling them like, "Hey, I'm reading Carl's book. It's so cool."
Oh, nice, nice.
After I finish finishing a script for a video for Murderabilia, I want to give my copy to Jalen because I know she's also very interested. So yeah, it's been a great journey.
Read it with the lights on.
Yeah, but no, Carl, thank you so much. And I want to look at the camera when I say this. Guys, please check out this copy, Murderabilia. Well, not this exact copy, but definitely check out Murderabilia. It's available on Amazon.
And sign up for BookBase.
And sign up for BookBase.
Sign up for BookBase.
Thank you so much, Carl. This has been a great time. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Carl Vonderau, and I wrote a book called Murderabilia. It has won several prizes, and I hope you will check it out on BookBase.